and I took the potion. So he had a potion of psilocybin.
Wow. Hades comes out of the ground with 4 horses. He abducts her, brings her down, and then Demeter, they ask her to nurse this child. And then she says something really strange, and I wonder what it means. I haven't looked up the Greek on this. You probably know the Greek.
Yeah.
She says that this child is the anointed of the gods.
Translated as the Christos. Yeah. There is a reason why Jews are not Christian. Christianity is not a Jewish religion. It's a Hellenistic religion because of the conquest of Alexander the Great. And so the Greeks were in contact, and the leaders of peoples of many ethnicities, and they were fascinated with the esoteric traditions, and Judaism was one of those exotic peoples. Jesus is Joshua. In order to assimilate into Greek Hellenistic culture, they changed the name Joshua to Jason, and Yah-esthai means to anoint with that toxin. Jason is named as the one who has that anointment, and in fact, in the myth, he is anointed by Medea in order to protect him from the fire-breathing dragons. Dionysus is the most important part, I think, of the work on Eleusis.
Professor Carl Ruck has his PhD at Harvard University in classical philology, and he's an authority on the ecstatic rituals of the god Dionysus. With the ethnomycologist R. Gordon Wasson and Albert Hofmann, he identified the secret psychoactive ingredient in the visionary potion that was drunk by the initiates at the Eleusinian Mystery. In Persephone's quest, Entheogens and the Origins of Religion, he proclaimed the centrality of psychoactive sacraments at the very beginning of religion to free the topic from the pejorative connotations for words like drug or hallucination.
Of mushroom lore, his book on Soma, the psychoactive sacrament in the Vedic tradition, and he proposed we work on the Eleusinian mystery. And so it was not anything that I had learned much about in my training. It was a religious ceremony in which what happened was kept secret, so there wasn't much you could say about it. And my teachers never thought it was very important, although it was the great religious experience for most of the people of all ranks of society in antiquity. The story is rather strange because Wasson and I took the potion, but Hofmann, who had sent the samples, sent only enough for 2 people. And so Wasson felt it would be boring for Staples just to sit during the session. And we didn't need him as a monitor because Wasson's daughter, who was a nurse, was going to monitor us. And so he offered to Staples something else. He had a potion of psilocybin.
Wow.
And so before we did the experiment, Wasson said the procedure is to observe silence during these, what happens. The substance he had identified as the agent for the visionary experience was correct. Actually, the identification of the precise agent isn't the most important part of the road to Eleusis. And that was my task, to show that such a thing was not only possible in ancient Greece, but it was in keeping with what we know about Greek culture. And that is not the way most people reconstruct classical Greek culture or antiquity in general. The subject of drugs was at that time totally anathema to ordinary classical scholars. And so it was my task to show that it was not only possible, but appropriate. And that's my contribution to the book. We now know that probably it was not the substance, that in the various toxins that are produced by ergot, and ergots of different on different hosts produce different complexes of ergotoxins. So it's a complex chemistry, but only one of the toxins is soluble in water.
Oh, okay.
And so Hofmann had decided that that was the way in antiquity they could access something like LSD.
Wow, that's fascinating.
What he identified was ergonovine, which at that time we pronounced as ergonovine. It was very novel to us, but I think it's ergonovine. It's water soluble. But it did not produce an experience for us. And other people have tried to replicate the experience, and it hasn't worked for them either.
Wow, interesting.
So about 20 years later, I worked with two chemists and proposed a different way of extracting a psychoactive element from the complex of toxins. You have to extract the correct toxin, apparently, because some of the toxins are poisonous and produce ergotism, a disease or an affliction caused by eating bread contaminated with grains that have been hosts to ergots. And Saint Anthony's fire is one of the names for it in the medieval period. And Saint Vitus dance, the fire, because it produces an extreme dermatological affliction that can end up being gangrenous. And Saint Vitus dance, because it also produces involuntary nerve contractions, so that you appear to be dancing a devilish dance. But what we proposed was that you could extract ergine from the toxins, not by solution in water, because ergonovine is the only one that's water soluble. But there's another procedure in which water can break down substances, not dissolve them, but break them down and cause a chemical reaction. And the two chemists that I worked with, Webster and Perrine, came up with the idea that if you had an alkaline solution, which is easy to obtain by adding bone ash to the water, and bone ash would have an appropriate symbolism, since the ashes would come from the bones of animals that were burnt as sacrificial offerings.
Oh, wow.
Through hydrolysis, you end up with ergine, and ergine is LSA, which is very similar to LSH. LSA is the same chemical in LSH, the same chemical that is psychoactive in Morning Glory, Ololiqui sacrament. Right. And so we proposed that. What we did not propose was extracting something with alcohol, because you could also make an extraction of a toxin from the complex with alcohol. But the myth prohibits wine, and so we assumed that was a clear indication that this was something other than that. But other people have proposed that it was actually alcohol that extracted the agent. The precise identity is not that important. The importance is that this great religious experience that lasted for 1,000 years in antiquity, and was experienced by people of all ranks, including all of the people we admire as the pillars of Greek art and literature. They had this as an experience and testified that it was the overwhelming experience of a lifetime. Yeah. And it's important also because Christianity which replaced the paganism of classical antiquity, Greco-Roman antiquity, was probably a supplanting of a similar mystery experience originally.
I want to let's start with the mystery. Let's start with the hymn to Demeter. That's so we can get that out of the way. Just for people who have no idea, haven't read it yet. Or Persephone is a child of the gods. She's this young, beautiful girl goddess, and she's out in the field just having a good time. And all of a sudden, Hades comes out of the ground with 4 horses, and he comes out of the Hades, the underworld. He's the king of, and he abducts her, brings her down, and then Demeter, which is her mother, which is also
she's the sister of Zeus.
sister. She's the mother of Persephone, and she has to go bring her back. So she goes on a little journey. First, she sees Helios tells her what happened. That's how she finds out. She finds out Zeus had a part of it. She gets angry. Anyway, she goes into the town of Eleusis. That's where the well is, right?
Yeah, Eleusis. Yeah.
She goes to the town of Eleusis, and she meets the people who live there, and they ask her. They're saying, and this is where my first question is going to be at. Before we even get to the end, I have a direct question about this one part where they ask her to nurse this child, and she's like, "Fine, I'll do it." She takes the child and nurses the child. And then she said something really strange, and I wonder what it means. I haven't looked up the Greek on this. You probably know the Greek.
Yeah.
She says that this child is the anointed of the gods.
Yeah.
Would that translate Christ of the gods? Christos?
It would translate as the Christos, the anointed.
Wow.
The Christ.
So I'm not. That blows my mind. That's pretty funny.
It is the same myth. There is a reason why Jews are not Christians.
Right.
That Christianity is not a Jewish religion. It's a Hellenistic religion. And in the Hellenistic period, which is turn of the when BC became the Common Era, CE, the world had greatly expanded because of the conquest of Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
And so the Greeks were in contact, and the leaders of peoples of many ethnicities, and they were fascinated with the esoteric traditions of these exotic peoples. And Judaism was one of those exotic peoples. They were particularly fascinated with their secret lore and the religion. And so out of Judaic material, but as a Hellenistic religion, or perhaps out of Judaism influenced by Hellenism, that is to say, esoteric mystery traditions within Judaism, of which we know there were such. The Essene community may have been one of them, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. A new religion arose, but it is not a Jewish religion. It's a Greek religion. It's a Hellenistic religion. And that's why Jews don't convert to Christianity, because it's not a Jewish religion.
So what you're saying right now,
and the Christos, the anointed one,
yeah,
is exactly the same pattern, only instead of being matriarchal in its emphasis, you don't, instead of having a goddess and her daughter, you have a paternal father and his son. And the mystery of the Christian religion is that the deity separates himself into the son, and that son is the mediator with humanity, is born as a man and lives through the experience of dying as a way of uniting our mortality with the divinity of the Father. But the same pattern is what's involved at Eleusis, only instead of it being uniting with the Father, it has to do with the dominance of the mother goddess.
Yeah, and there's even a part where she's like, "All you men are fools." They
Yeah.
lack a sense to foresee. This is a very matriarchal version of the dying and rising mystery, and
Exactly.
and so what you're saying right now, the myth of not Demeter, of Inanna in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Enuma Elish. I have a Myths of Mesopotamia Oxford Classics version in English, and there's the myth of Inanna. She literally goes down to hell for 3 days. Specifically says 3 days. She goes down and saves Tammuz, who's down there, just like Persephone. And she brings Tammuz up, and what does it say at the last paragraph? It says that they raised the dead with them as they brought Tammuz back up.
Yeah.
So when I read that, I said, there's got to be a connection between this and Jesus just going down and dying for 3 days and bringing the dead up with him. For other commonalities, you have the story of Osiris. He's killed. He's chopped up in a million pieces. And then Isis, just like Demeter and just like Inanna, she's the savior. She goes and finds his body. He becomes the king of the underworld. He doesn't resurrect, but Horus is born, and he becomes the resurrection of Osiris, basically. He sort of lives out the father. And then you see that in Hermeticism, where you have the Father, the Son, the Tot and Thoth. I do what the Father says, the will of my Father. You see these sort of motifs all over the ancient world, and I love how you started out with this, because it all starts with Alexander. Alexander the Great, whatever sort of shift in the world happened when he took over, because all of a sudden you have all these mystery cults propping up. All of a sudden you have the Ptolemies interested in translating the Hebrew text into Greek. You get the Septuagint. Yeah. All of a sudden, next thing you know, the soil is ready for Christianity.
Yeah. You know about Alexander the Great and the problem of who his father was.
Well, Ammon.
His mother.
So Nectanebo, you're talking about?
Yeah, his mother was a Bacchant, a great aficionado of mystery cults.
Right.
And she met her husband Philip at an initiation into the great gods of Samothrace. So she knew what a mystery experience was, and it's part of the biography reported for Alexander, that he found his wife in bed with a giant snake, which is part of the initiatory scenario. And after that, he didn't feel so happy sleeping with her. And she told her son that Philip was not his father, actually, but that Zeus was his father.
Right, and which is Ammon in
Egypt. When he conquered Egypt, he went into the desert and asked a question which we're never told, but we're told that he came back and said that he was satisfied with the answer. And what he obviously asked was Zeus Ammon, the Egyptian version of Zeus, whether he was his father, and he liked the answer.
Yeah, in Luxor.
But isn't that exactly the same thing as Christ and Mary?
Yeah. Well, what's even funnier about that is that, and there's a scene, and I think it's in Mark, where Jesus is there's a voice from heaven that says, "This is my son who I have begotten."
Yes.
Well, if you read the Greek Alexander romance, he goes into Egypt. He meets the oracle. He goes to the oracle. Just sort of, it's like a baptism thing. He's like sort of like a shift in his world, and all of a sudden you get a voice saying, "This is my son who I have begotten," and it's Ammon, who is also known as Zeus.
Yes.
But this is the Egyptian version. But I just thought that he was the first son of God archetype like figure.
Yeah.
And he was even worshipped for like 200 years after that in Egypt by the Ptolemies. Yeah. The Ptolemies, when he died, the Ptolemies intercepted his funeral. He had this giant house on wheels going back to Macedonia by Perdiccas, I think it was. And then Ptolemy was like, "Nah, man, I'm taking that." And he just went and got it and brought it back to Egypt. And then they battled, and then Perdiccas got killed. And that's the end of Perdiccas.
Yeah.
And so these stories are mind-blowing, because what you have now is you have this clear representation of like these men becoming gods on earth and being worshipped, and there's cults in their names, and they die, but people still worship them, and they had these big temples and this like that to me is the start of what happens and later on when you see Christianity evolve. I mean,
Yeah.
even when I look at the story of Vespasian walking in the temple of Egypt, and all of a sudden he said, well, this is what according to Tacitus, who knows if this is true or not. Obviously, it's probably not true. But the story goes that he's in the temple, and some guy walks up to him with no leg. He touches the guy's leg, and the guy's leg heals back, grows back out of his limb. And then another person walks up, and he spits in his eyes, and then his eyes are healed.
Yeah.
So that tells me that there was a longing, there was a popularity in the air for some sort of healer savior, like Asclepius type of character, which became Jesus.
Foreign ethnicities change their given names so that they're easier to assimilate into the dominant culture. And the name of Jesus is Joshua.
Right.
And people who are named Joshua, in order to assimilate into Greek Hellenistic culture, they changed the name Joshua to Jason. And Jason is the Greek hero.
From the Argonautica.
Yeah, the Argonautica, the golden fleece, the magical substance, the quest for probably the sacred sacrament, and he's named Joshua's or Jesus's. They changed their name to Jason, and as it turns out, Jason is an exact equivalent of Christos. He's named for the fact that he was anointed with the toxin, the drug. The eos is the word for toxin, an aerotoxin, both an arrow and the toxin on the arrow. And esthai means to anoint with that toxin. Jason is named as one who has that anointment. And in fact, in the myth, he is anointed by Medea in order to protect him from the fire-breathing dragons when he gets the golden fleece.
So where does this anointed savior idea come from? Where have you ever thought about that? Because it seems to be why. I guess another question would be, why did the savior have to be anointed? Because all the anointment is you're putting some sort of oil on them. Why do they have to do that? What's the point of that?
It's a fundamental concept that you are what you eat. If you eat apples, you turn into an apple, whatever. And smearing the substance on your skin makes you, it's like covering yourself with the fleece of the golden ram, or with the essence of the golden apple, or with the toxin, which would in fact be absorbed through the skin, that makes you the living anthropomorphism of the sacred drug.
And so is that also with like Osiris? I think Attis too. They call him the dead god.
Yeah,
He's sort of like, they're like sort of mummies. They're like being anointed. They're like, it's like when you put mummy or oil over a dead body to preserve it. Is that sort of another thing? Is there like being protected from death? Is that like similar? Yeah, that makes sense. That's really fascinating. And then another thing I wanted to bring up is that in the mysteries in your book, it talks about there's this really peculiar part. It's one verse. It almost doesn't even make sense why it's there, but I think it's Helios telling Demeter, he says, "Don't worry, your own, who's a ruler of many, or your brother Adonis, who's ruler of many, he can help you out," or something along those lines.
Yeah, the myth, going back to Demeter when she takes the mystery child and the job of nursing it, and the child seems to be growing marvelously, but she has a special way of nursing it.
Right.
She feeds it from her breast during the daytime, but at night she burns him in the hearth. And although the child is marvelously growing, the mother and her daughters become suspicious,
Right.
and they spy on Demeter in the evening, in the night, when instead of feeding the child, she's burning him. And why is she burning him? Because she intends to make him immortal.
Right.
To be immortal means you have to be dematerialized. The incarnation is a sin. It's when the spirit becomes trapped in the physicality of matter is what the incarnation is. In Christianity, incarnation is the precedent for excarnation. The Christians believe that death is not important, but actually to be looked forward to, because the spirit will be released from the body and can return to immortality. And this is what Demeter is doing. She is trying to undo the incarnation. The incarnation, when she feeds it with matter. At night, she intends to make him immortal, so she burns off the mortality. But the mother and her daughters don't understand this mystery of excarnation. And so Demeter says that she's done all she can, but she will not tend the child anymore. He's going to have to be mortal. The most he can be is a great mortal. And that is exactly what our situation is. We know that existence is futile because it's temporary, or at least this material existence is futile. We will be excarnated, and if there is a living essence to the living principle of the spirit, we do have a kind of immortality. But that doesn't mean to say that being human is unimportant. In our passage through humanity, we have the opportunity to be great in one way or the other, or to be evil in one way or the other. And those of us that choose the higher path, it means nothing in the totality of the cosmos whether we do something great and are good, or do something bad, because the universe, the cosmos, is immoral. But we as humans have the opportunity to say, no, I don't like it that way. I can conceive of something better. I can make art. I can make music. I can write poetry. I can build buildings. I can build societies. I can build nations.
Yeah.
I do. I leave the testimony to the cosmos that I was here. I don't care what the rest of matter encounters, but I have been here.
Right. And that's
Your identity.
so the myth versus this myth is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And the part where Helios, he says to her, goddess, she's lamenting because she just lost Persephone. And this is the part I don't understand. I just want to. Helios tells her, goddess, cease your great lament. You need not have such wrath. Adonis, the ruler of many, is your own brother and is not unfitting husband among the immortals for your daughter. And now the reason why I thought about this is because when you go back to the Inanna myth, what's his name? Tammuz seems to be the equivalent of Adonis. And
Yes.
what exactly is the significance of this sort of peculiar character, this Adonis, Tammuz?
Adonis, Adonaios, and various versions on it. It's not a name; it's a title. It just means Lord.
Right.
And the overwhelming drive of our myth-making fantasy is to mediate opposites, and the greatest opposites are between male versus female sexuality, and between the eternal deities and deities that die, or between eternal existence and death. And anything that mediates those great divisions is a overwhelming story. And the Eleusinian Mystery is an example of that mediation. Demeter and her daughter Persephone are essentially the same persona,
Right.
but Persephone, as the daughter of Zeus, and who is immortal, an Olympian deity, and of Demeter, his sister, who is obviously also a celestial deity and immortal. Her heritage should have been immortality, but that leaves us humans who mediate between life and death with no paradigm. Instead, she's abducted to the underworld by Zeus's brother Hades and has a child by him. And that child is death, but death that has changed its valence. Instead of being fearful, its death is your friend. Personification of the great plan which mediates between life and death. And so she, as a figure, spends half of her time in the underworld with death and her husband, Hades, and half of the time with her mother, an Olympian, mediating between the two experiences of our humanity, our existence as living beings, and our knowledge of the fact that we are destined to die. And so it mediates that great anxiety that we as humans, as men, feel.
So let me ask you this: in Revelation, towards the end, there's a verse that says that Hades and Death gave up their dead. Now, what is that doing? It's in the middle of nowhere, in this long, weird, dreamlike Bible book, which is Revelation, Apocalypse. All of a sudden, they're like, by the way, Hades gave up its dead, and Death gave up its dead. Wait a minute, aren't those characters from Greek mythology? What are they doing here?
At the end of time, um, and we have to realize that time is an illusion.
Right.
We now know that it's variable depending on speed and so on. And so the future is the past is the future. Time is an illusion. But at the end of time, which means when the clock stops and you stop this illusion of temporal progression, the graves will open and there will be one reunion.
It's like when all the black holes suck up each other and there's nothing left. Then there's just gonna be something else after that or something. Like, you know what I mean? I always think about that. Like when people die, they don't actually go anywhere. They're actually gone, but they don't know they're dead. That's gonna feel like a split second between the time you die and the time the universe ends and the last black hole sucks up the other black hole. And then there's nothing. That's the moment where all this, you know what I mean? That's the thing you hope for.
Because you never realize the moment you fall asleep.
And the mysteries, what talks about Eleusis, the people of Eleusis, they were doing these sacred rites, and the initiates of the mysteries, they would come out of it in so awe and amazement that they would no longer fear death.
Everyone has had, not everyone, but people who have experimented in these matters can recount an overwhelming experience which has made them realize that they have constructed everything about themselves and the reality incorrectly up to that point. And mine was, I mean, there were various ones, but the most overwhelming was when I came to realize that everything that existed was my own construction and I could change it any way I wanted. I mythologized it as being in the garden with Adam and the Creator at the moment where Adam is naming all the animals and things. And I then realized that I was there and looking out the window, and what I was naming was what I was seeing. And then I thought, well, that means I must be with the deity. And but afterwards, when I reconstructed in my mind, remembering what had happened, I realized that I came to the point that I must be with the deity, and I was expecting to see the deity, but he wasn't there, or it wasn't there.
Right.
And I realized that's because you can't see yourself. Who initiated him with Amanita Muscaria. It's hard to manage Amanita Muscaria. So many people have no experience with it. You have to know the correct preparation. You speak of shamans.
Was with Dionysus and how he relates to all this. I know you have there's like all these mysteries sort of tie together. You got the Orphic mysteries. Orpheus is the high priest of Dionysus. Dionysus.
Dionysus is the most important part, I think, of the work on Eleusis, and that is because it's well recognized that he was a great deity for the Greco-Roman tradition, and he's associated with wine, and people have left it at that. Although we have clear indications, not only in literature, but in historical accounts, that in some aspects of his worship, he was attended, he being, of course, only a spirit, so he would be invisible as the moving force in groups of women who went totally wild on mountains called the Bacchants or the Maenads. Maenads means that they became mantic, frantic, out of their minds. And so that is well documented, not merely as a metaphor of literature, but in historical accounts. But the literary version of it is, of course, Euripides' Bacchae tragedy.
This I've read.
Most people have said, well, that's strange, isn't it? But here you have a god who presides over an intoxicating substance, which at that time you would call a drug, and it apparently induces extreme dementia. And no one interpreting classical culture has wondered, what does it mean to have a deity of intoxication as the center of society? And it's well known that the Greeks drank their wine diluted with water. The customary dilution was with 3 or 4 parts water. Anyone who has red wine and mixes it with 4 cups of red wine and mixes it with 4 cups of water realizes not only has he diluted the potency of the drink, but he's ended up with something that's practically tasteless.
Right.
Yet that's the way that the Greeks drank their wine. Really strange. And the reasons given for doing this is that they didn't want to get drunk. Well, if you don't want to get drunk, don't drink it in the first place. But that is not the case. The way in which one drank the wine was a drinking party, drinking together. And one didn't go to the party and decide that I'm not going to drink very much, and so you sip on your single glass of wine all night long. Your host doled out the wine in a series of toasts. The shape of the vessel in which you drank the substance is important. Our wine glass with the slender stem imitates the Greek wine drinking cup. The Greeks had various kinds of drinking cups appropriate for different ceremonies. You could have a cup that had a handle very much like a mug, a coffee mug, and that was appropriate for what you were drinking. If you're going to drink something that's intoxicating, that would be the sensible way to, because when you get tipsy, you're apt to not be able to manage it. But instead, it's like our wine goblet. It's even worse than our wine goblet because it's actually a saucer on a stem. And if you're at all unsteady, you're going to spill it. And of course, if you spill it at a drinking party, at a cocktail party, you've made a fool of yourself. You're not supposed to appear to be drunk. So the cup is against your maintaining sobriety. and the host would dole out a round, and you didn't just sip it, you drank it, and then you had conversation on important topics, and then another round, and you continue, and it was up to you to maintain the appearance of being sober, or maybe even the delusion that you'd become more fluent because you're becoming intoxicated.
And Dionysus is like
But
becoming.
now we know, now we know how much drinking, how much the cup contains. It doesn't contain much, and it's diluted with water. And we know how many rounds you would need in order to get high. And after 4, you're in dangerous company. After about 6, you're quite drunk. And after that, you end up with drunken brawls. The most famous account of is Plato's Symposium. At the beginning of this drinking party, they're not going to get drunk because they got so drunk the night before. And
Oh
so
yeah, that's right. That's right.
we're not planning to get drunk. And yet, and so this is the most famous account of it. Alcibiades breaks in, and they drink more heavily, and it ends with everyone having passed out. And the narrator, when he wakes up, finds that only 3 people haven't passed out, and that's Socrates, and he's having a conversation with the comic poet in whose honor this party is given, and the tragic poet, and the comic poet, on a subject which is very interesting, which is the same inspiration produced both comedy and tragedy. But unfortunately, our narrator fell asleep and didn't hear it. And that's the whole point of what is established in this, in all of the Platonic dialogues. What you hear is not the message; it's what you don't hear, which is the message.
The
So
esoteric.
if you're intelligent, you would know what the answer to that question is.
Well, what I noticed about this is Plato's writing about Socrates, and they're walking to this party, and Socrates is very strange. First, they get to the house, and then he leaves. But they all walk in, they turn around, Socrates is gone. He like dips out without anyone knowing, and he's gone. Like, where did Socrates go? We want to. They're all concerned, and then he just shows back up when he feels like it.
Yeah.
And then they're talking about the god love being the firstborn. And when I read this part, I remember thinking, I wonder if this god love firstborn, Eros, I wonder if he has some sort of influence on the Christian theology, because they talk about how if the God of love rules, then if the God of love rules your nation or whatever, then everyone is taking care of each other. Nobody's in a competition. In fact, when someone invades you, you'll be more ready to fight because you're fighting for the ones you love. So they're talking about how love, the firstborn, is the greatest of all gods. And then, of course, it gets into the big party part. It's because I wonder, when we're talking about Dionysus, and he sort of is the god of love in his own way. He's a god of party, of madness, but also like love and sex and all that stuff. And I'm wondering so in the Bacchae, he talks about, he's the son of Zeus, and they doubt him, and then he comes back, and when he comes back, they're all like, oh no, we're sorry, we repent. And he says, no, it's too late. The wages of death our wages of sin is death. And I wonder if you think there's something going on there with it, with the relationship between Dionysus and Jesus.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
The metaphor for this visionary experience induced by altered consciousness, the most overwhelming experience that we as humans are capable of is orgasm, which is very close to experience of dying, complete release. And it is mystics experience communion with the deity as that kind of cosmic orgasm. You could think that, well, it's sex and it's obscene and so forth, but there's no way that it's obscene because you're having sex with a spirit, with something that's not there. So it is not your uh, your physical understanding of what orgasm is. It's a metaphor applied to what is this feeling of mystical union, and that is, as I said, a complete release of something like a death that isn't a death. And that's what the female devotees of the god are experiencing. They went completely raving mad on the mountainside, and people claimed they were having sex, but there were no males there, and so and they're not being accused of having sex with each other. Uh, they're having sex with the god himself.
Wow.
And this is, I mean, and these patterns persist into Christianity, which, as I said, is a Hellenistic religion. In Catholicism, at every celebration of the Mass, where the Eucharist is consumed, the priest who dresses as a woman, but not because of sexual problem, because he represents the church, which is feminine. He, in the persona that is saved the congregation, is married to the deity. That's what the Christian Mass is.
Wow. And
It's
then you have,
an enactment of this cosmic orgasm.
and so do you think that that's
Not that it's experienced that way anymore.
right, right,
And,
right.
and the Eucharist is not mind altering, it's just bread and wine. But that's not what it used to be. Or that's not what it is in the secret mystery cults within Christianity.
So what do you think? What do you think happened? Where first of all, I think we established there's definitely a connection leading up to the Christian era. How do you think the Gospels get produced? And do you think it was like the normal? But most people think it was just some fishermen with no education that put together these masterpieces, or do you think there was like some sort of like Plutarch like character somewhere writing this out? What do you think about that?
I think that it's all a prepared story, a myth, uh, that was then reworked and made into the form that we have it now.
Yeah.
None of the Gospels were actually um, the letters of Paul are actual documents by a Jew who was Hellenized and who is very fluent in Greek. But the 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 four canonic Gospels are only four chosen out of many, and they were chosen fourth century, I believe,
Yeah.
because there could only be four pillars to support the universe. And so these are the four pillars of the universe, which is Christian. Uh, Scholars can recognize various writers within each of the Gospels. And so it's all been a homogenized and rewritten and manufactured tradition.
When you say most people think that there legitimately was a guy, a Jewish person who didn't have like it almost seems like too much too it seems like there's something missing. Like
I'm extremely doubtful that Zeus and Demeter ever existed.
right.
And I am just as doubtful that Jesus is not a myth.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there probably was a guy.
It doesn't mean to say that Jesus is not a deity,
Right.
but I don't. I think that the biography that we have of Jesus is a myth.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, it lines up with parts of the Old Testament where they're repurposing it to make it about Jesus. And it's, like we
If,
already
if,
mentioned, you got the parts of other myths that aren't even Jewish.
if there was a historical figure who then became Jesus, it was probably the bloodline inheritor to the throne of David.
Yeah.
Who had to be born from that lineage, which would be Mary, and that it would have been someone who was sequestered from his opponents during his adolescence someplace. That we know nothing about the life of Jesus before the end of his life. That person could have been sequestered in the Essene community where the Dead Sea Scrolls, from which the Dead Sea Scrolls survive.
I think you're right about that. That's what me and James Tabor were talking about. And that makes the most sense. And I think that when they start to write these Gospels, and I'll hear what you think, and then we'll close out. I think that when they're actually writing these Gospels, what they do is they're taking Paul's epistles and they're formulating somewhat of an idea of what to write a narrative from, but they're also borrowing from Old Testament, even like the mysteries, Dionysus, but even not just myths. I think they're looking at Caesar and Augustus and Alexander, and I think they're saying, okay, well, Caesar died and he was taken by Venus and brought up to the comet, and then the will of his father was done by Augustus. So Jesus does the will of his father in heaven. I think there's all these motifs playing out, and I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to make the ultimate religion for all religions, and they did it, and it worked. I think it's a masterpiece. I really do. I think that's the missing link to all these mysteries. We didn't even get into the Soma, or the Vedas, or any of that. There's a whole other thing right there, and I think that's the missing link. I think that's where all these mysteries come from. There's a hallucinogenic experience, and they lost that. And religion sort of became this sort of like corporate thing, like this sort of like, like corporation of put our church in that kingdom and one over there and make them all run the same. And, it just sort of got staled out that way. But it would have been a lot better if they just kept things the way they were. And I think people would still be doing religion right now if they did that, It gives people a purpose and experience and something that changes the way they see the universe and life and all that. But this book is great. I just got the Apples to Apollo. I'm gonna check that one out next. And
you knew about Brian Murarescu's book, Immortality.
Oh yeah, that's another one. Yeah,
the Christian Eucharist is a drink of that deity's blood. Wine was considered blood of Dionysus.
One who chews my flesh, my sarx, and drinks my blood, my hema, has eternal life. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink, perhaps saying that it's more true than the Dionysian rite.
In the Bacchae of Euripides is when Pentheus, who's opposing the rite of Dionysus, and Dionysus is disguised as the prophet of his own religion. He isn't revealing himself in his true divine persona.
Here we have a drinking party of guys who got drunk the night before and decided they're not going to get drunk today. Instead, they're going to talk about Eros.
You can't have perfection unless you have the recipient of your rejected, less than perfect characteristics. And the relationship between Apollo and Dionysus is that they are really the same deity. But Dionysus is the one that could bear the burden of Apollo's darker persona.
Talking about the Eucharist. And I really think it's based on the symposium tradition. Image that is used is of Mithras slaying a bull with a solar image overlooking it. Castor and Polydeuces are important because they share one immortality and one mortality. That is, on alternating days, one is alive and the other is dead.
And I'm with two PhDs from Harvard. One of them is a classical philologist, and the other one is a specialist in New Testament origins and Christian origins. Dennis R. MacDonald, author of The Dionysian Gospel, and as well as many other titles, but that's the one we're going to be focusing mostly on, mimesis in general. And we got Carl A.P. Ruck, who is a Dionysian scholar who has written Apples of Apollo, as well as some other works as well. But that will be the one we'll be trying to look at. And these books connect, not directly, indirectly, but they both are looking at the same thing, basically, if that makes sense. But yeah, well, welcome, guys. Thank you guys for coming. Appreciate this.
Thank you, Neil.
I want to start with Dionysus, his sort of connection to the Bacchic rites and how the Eucharist is sort of developed in Christian theology. In Apples of Apollo, you've touched on this, Professor Ruck. Can you talk about this for a second?
Well, the obvious connection is that Dionysus is a deity that you ingest as a sacred drink. And we know that Jesus becomes associated with wine, the first miracle at Cana. And the Christian Eucharist is a drink of that deity's blood. Wine was considered blood of Dionysus. So there's a strong parallel.
Dr. McDonald, you touched on this in your book as well. And you touched on the mimesis side of this. What exactly did you come across when you were looking at this?
Well, first of all, Neil and Carl, I want to talk a little about the Gospel of John as a compositional mess. It actually went through 3 stages of composition, apparently, and it's only the earliest one where you have the striking Dionysian elements that Dr. Ruck has just talked about. The second layer is what I call the anti-Jewish gospel, and it identifies the Eucharist, or the eating of Jesus's flesh and blood, drinking of the blood, as a trope of manna in the wilderness and the Passover element. So you have that mythological layer over it coming from Judaism. And the final redaction probably is a way of incorporating the Gospel of John into a Johannine corpus. Now, that part is irrelevant to us right now, but I'm going to read for you and Carl my reconstruction of the earliest level where the Dionysian traits are most apparent.
Absolutely.
This appears in several of my books, including the synopsis, which is coming out pretty soon.
Awesome.
Truly I say to you, says Jesus, the one who chews my flesh, my sarx, and drinks my blood, my hema, has eternal life. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink, perhaps saying that it's more true than the Dionysian rite. When many of his disciples heard, they said, this saying is hard. Who can hear it? Well, it's hard because in a Jewish context, drinking blood was forbidden. And then from this point on, many of his disciples went back and no longer traveled with him, so that it was considered scandalous. But later, it was made into a rite interpreted in terms of Judaism. I had a student who wrote a dissertation on the origin of the Christian Eucharist, and argued that it certainly must be Dionysian, and gives lots of evidence for it. Now, Professor Ruck will say, as I'm going to say, that the traditions about Dionysus are varied and difficult and sometimes contradictory. So there's lots of room for interpretation with these data. But I think one thing we can say is that the Euripides play Bacchae was the most important influence on subsequent literature related to Dionysus. And early Christians did not hesitate to use the Bacchae in order to retell stories of Jesus. And this happens all the way until the 12th century. At least in the East, where Greek was still known. It was lost in the West when people no longer knew the Bacchae very well. So that would be my take on the Gospel of John.
Absolutely. Dr. Ruck, after what you just heard there, I mean, is there is there a sort of salvation rite in Dionysus in the same way as there is in Jesus drinking the wine?
Yes, I think the most uncanny and profound episode in the Bacchae of Euripides is when Pentheus, who's opposing the rite of Dionysus, and Dionysus, who's disguised as the prophet of his own religion, isn't revealing himself in his true divine persona. He's disguised. Pentheus says, "How did you see him?" And the prophet Dionysus, the god, says, "Eye to eye," and they're looking eye to eye to each other. And I think that Euripides, and it's the cultic meaning, is aware of what the identity of Pentheus is. He is Dionysus. It's the two versions of the deity looking at each other, face to face. The only thing is that Pentheus doesn't know what his role is, even though his name says that he's the one who's suffering. He's the one that has to be sacrificed. And after all, the god Dionysus is sacrificed every time the grape is harvested and crushed, in order to produce the civilized intoxicant. Pentheus is the primitive version of the intoxicant that is perfected in Dionysus. He is the one who has to be offered in sacrifice. Jesus is not a Dionysus. Jesus is Pentheus in his role to his divine father. He says, supposedly on the cross, take this cup away from me, but if it is their will, I'll do it. And the cup is the cup of his own sacrifice. And in every performance of the sacrificial offering, the victim has to acquiesce in accepting the role of the suffering half. The way it was usually performed is that some trick is played on the animal, like sprinkling some water on its head, and when it shakes its head to get the water off of it, the priest interprets that as the animal, since the animal can't speak, the animal's way of saying, yes, I want to be sacrificed. And actually, it's a very profound and horrible thing that we as humans have to face, which is that we live by killing things and eating them.
Wow. And another thing I just thought about is when it comes to the Eleusinian Mysteries, Demeter, she's basically the savior in this story. And I noticed when she goes into this town after she finds out that Persephone's been abducted, she goes into this town and it sounds like she is going there and she seems like a Jesus figure to them. It's like this woman from out of town who comes in and she's teaching them new things and doing all these weird rites, and they're watching her and they're paying attention to her and listening to her. And then she takes their child, who they ask her to nurse, and she says, "This is the child who is the Christos of the gods, the anointed of the gods." What is the purpose of this? It really is confusing when I read this.
Well, they're typically in archetypal symbolism, 3 persona for the female. There are 2 for the male, which is patterned by the transition that occurs at puberty. But there is no definite transition when the male ceases to be sexually active. But for the female, there are 2 division points, menarche and then menopause. And so the female is, the male is typically divided into the father and the son. And the female is divided into the maiden persona, the maternal persona, and the postmenopausal persona. And usually the postmenopausal has special knowledge. The pathway of the female is a more painful business of transition. Menarche makes the female think that she's dying, and menopause then makes her feel that she's worthless. And both of them have psychological effects on many women. But by going through these two transitions, the female is assumed to have attained a certain knowledge. And the knowledge is that the three aspects of her identity come together. And so the postmenopausal female is typically the old hag who has all the wisdom, the wise woman. And Demeter, when Persephone is abducted, objects to that abduction, goes to Eleusis, but she's been as the mother of Persephone, and then Persephone now being abducted is a sexual abduction. So the maiden has moved on to the maternal phase. That means that Demeter has moved on to the third phase. So what she offers at Eleusis is her task of takes the job of being the wet nurse for the divine child of the royal family in the palace. But she does a strange kind of nursing. She puts him in the fire.
Oh yeah.
He seems to be growing marvelously, but what she does at night is put him into fire, and his mother and her daughters catch her doing that. They don't understand what this mystery is. She's burning him. What she's doing is burning off his mortality. She's trying to make him immortal. And when she's caught in the act, she pretty much says, "That's it, I've done with it." She throws him down on the ground. And she says he's just going to have to be mortal. But there is a possibility in mortality that you can be a great mortal. So he can be a hero, but he cannot be immortal.
And what exactly? Because this whole entire passage doesn't seem like it makes sense to Persephone or to Zeus, or just kind of happens in the middle of the story. What is the purpose? Is it a fertility story? Is that what this is?
Well, yeah. I mean, if there are gods, what need is there for humans?
Right.
I mean, and in fact, in the Greek myth, the creation of humans by Prometheus, Zeus, when he finds out that humans have been created, wants to destroy us. We're totally useless. But he can't destroy us because Prometheus is a clever trickster. And what he has done is taken matter, which is what we are, but he's implanted in us the spirit of fire. And so Zeus can't destroy us, because in destroying us, he would be destroying the immortality principle, which is himself. So instead, he has to put up with us. And a second version of the same myth is the institution of the sacrificial offering. Prometheus killed an animal and then wrapped up the inedible parts, the bones and the hide, in the fat, and put that parcel together with the pieces of meat on the fire, and asked Zeus which one he wanted. And Zeus enjoyed the smell of the matter being transmuted into smoke. He chose the fatty part, which is the part that we don't eat, and the bones. And because of that, that division of the portion was always performed in doing the sacrificial offering. I mean, typically in antiquity, you didn't eat an animal unless it was a sacrificial animal.
Yeah.
I think it was a problem for Christians to get meat because it came from pagan sacrifice.
Okay, I want to get to Apollo a little bit. But before that, I want to go to Dennis McDonald, Dr. McDonald. You've written about Odysseus, and his mimesis to Jesus, but you also talked about how Hector is about to die. He calls out for Apollo, his god, who's forsaken him. Can you touch on this a little bit? And also, anything that you just heard from Dr. Ruck that you want to touch on, feel free to jump on that.
Well, I think Professor Ruck did a beautiful job in talking about issues of immortality and so on in Greek mythology. And I appreciate that background. I would take issue, I think, Carl, a little bit with your statement that Jesus is primarily the pantheist character, because I think he also is a Dionysian character. And you can see this in the reception of the Gospels and so on, that Jesus or Paul play roles that are both Dionysian and like pantheists. Right. There's another piece of this that I think is important to emphasize, and that is the role of the victim in sacrifice as being, to some extent, cooperative. And I'm going to read a passage to both of you that I think you probably are not familiar with. In fact, I would say no one is. Wow. Because no one reads my books. But
they do.
It goes like this. It's a passage in the Odyssey where Odysseus and his men come across an island that's strange to them. It turns out to be an island of Lystrigonian cannibals. And Odysseus creates a search party of 3 to go and explore the island. The same thing he does with Circe, let's say, or he himself does with Polyphemus. And I'm going to read the story to you and tell me, both of you, if this sounds like anything in the Gospels. I sent comrades ahead to go and discover who the men were who ate bread from this land. I chose 2 men and sent with them a third as a herald. After disembarking, they traveled along a smooth path on which wagons carried wood from the high mountains down to the city. They met a young woman drawing water before the city. The noble daughter of Lystrigonian Antiphates. She had come down to the beautifully flowing spring, Artakia, where they brought water to the city. They came up to her, greeted her, and asked, "Who is the king of these people, and over whom did he rule?" She immediately pointed out the high-roofed house of her father, and when they entered the glorious home, they found his wife like the summit of a mountain. They were stricken with horror of her. Immediately she called her husband, Glorian Antiphates, from the place of assembly, and he contrived a miserable death for them. And once he grabbed one of my comrades and prepared his dinner. So that's the end of the quote. Other cannibals joined in the feasting, such that Odysseus's 12 ships, of his 12 ships, only his and his crew escaped. Is there anything in the Gospels that sounds like?
Yes, I read that passage with my Greek class just a couple of days ago.
Wow.
The men hated the woman, Homer says, very bluntly. She's some kind of monstrous giant. But the woman at the well, of course, reminds one of Jesus and the woman at the well.
Here's what I was thinking. On the first day of unleavened bread, when they slaughtered the Paschal lamb, he dined with the 12. He sent off 2 of his disciples and tells them, "Go into the city, and a man will greet you who is carrying a water jar. Follow him, And whatever place he enters, say to the owner of the house, that the teacher says, "Where is my guest room that I might eat the Passover with my disciples?" He will show you a large room upstairs, ready and set in order. There make preparations for us. In other words, they follow a water carrier to a lofty house, and instead of a cannibal feast, offers himself as, eat my flesh and drink my blood.
Wow.
And so here I think the Markan evangelist is recognizing a parallel to the Eucharist, and actually a passage in the Odyssey where you have cannibalism.
So I want to, another thing that you've talked about, Dr. McDonald, is the anointing of Odysseus's feet, and how it is like almost the perfect image of the anointing of the feet of Jesus by, and I think it's in Bethany, right? In Bethany?
No, there's Eurycleia, who washes the feet of Odysseus and recognizes him from his scar,
right?
Which is similar to the recognition of Jesus by his wounds in Luke and John.
Right. And so what happens here is this is a clear-cut case of mimesis, because not only do we have our main characters both being anointed, which is, by the way, which is what the Christos means, is the anointed. But you also, and I want to get to Jason and Medea in a second, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is you have Jesus' feet being anointed, and he tells the woman who is anointing his feet that her fame will be heard far and wide. The name Eurycleia, who anoints Odysseus' feet, means fame far and wide. It's right. Literally a pun on her name. Now, the reason why I want to bring this all up is because one of the most central myths in the ancient world was the Medea, the Argonautica, which was very tied to the mysteries. And Jason, Dr. Ruck, you talk about Jason's name having a connection to Jesus, and he's also anointed by Medea. Can you tell us about that?
Well, there's a superficial connection to begin with. Jesus was a common name, Joshua, a Hebrew name. And when Jews became assimilated to the Hellenic tradition, as often happens with ethnic minorities, they changed their name to a name that the dominant ethnicity recognizes. A lot of Demetriuses become James, and Joshua was changed into Yason. It sounds the same, but whether you can go from there that Jesus means that he is the anointed one, but except it's the fact that he says the anointed one, and Jason's name is what it is because he was anointed.
Yeah, and so how does that play out? He's with Medea, and he's on his journey. He's the hero. And what is the purpose of Medea anointing him? By the way, another thing I'm trying to get into is why is this anointing thing so important to all these myths? Like you ask me, what's you anoint someone's head with oil? It's like, okay, what'd you do? But for some reason, this is like a reoccurring thing in all of these ancient myths. The anointing. Why is this so important?
There were two things. The ointment would contain some substance, and when you smear the ointment on the skin, it's absorbed through the skin, and so it would be a way of making the person anointed. Let us say, if the anointment contained a psychoactive agent, the person would be imbued with that psychoactive toxin. So in chemical terms, it would make the person have altered consciousness if that's what the ingredient in the ointment is. And you could see that in the case of Jason, it is a psychoactive substance. And secondly, when you're covered with an ointment, that is your external identity. So it identifies the hero with that intoxicating sacrament.
Oh, that makes sense. And now,
my answer would be just a little different, Carl. There are 3 acts that require anointing in the Homeric epic. And this, I think, then becomes a trope in later reception. One is if you, as an act of hospitality, wash someone or even just wash their feet, then you anoint it afterwards in order to make the skin supple or fragrant. The same thing's true of an athlete. After you've exercised, you then have an unguent or an ointment that anoints the body to, again, make it supple and pleasant. But the other is anointing is one of the way you prepare a corpse for burial, even if you're going to burn it. You can see this in the case of Hector, where Achilles tells his maidservants to wash and anoint the body and then to wrap it so that Priam can take it back to be incinerated. So that you have the anointing as a issue of welcome and being gracious, being a host, as in washing someone's feet and then anointing it. And that's what Eurycleia does for Odysseus. But it also has a connection to death, so that when Jesus is anointed by a woman in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus interprets that as his anointing for his death. And so when the women come to the tomb in the Gospel of Mark, they bring unguents and oils in order to anoint him, but he's already been anointed. And his body is gone when they get there. So I think Dr. Ruck is certainly right in terms of the chemical composition of ointment and what that represents, but I think there are social representations too.
And of course, it also is reminiscent of the preparation of the corpse of the mummy, which makes the
that's right, yeah,
physicality not corruptible, so it preserves the physical
right
of the dead.
Yep.
Yeah. And you mentioned something that I wanted to touch on real quick is the scene of Hector, the king, the father of Hector, who goes to Achilles and asks for the body so we can have a proper burial for him. This you've mentioned in your book that this are Jesus in the Gospels when he's on the cross. There's a mimesis of that story in the Gospels where Joseph of Arimathea, his name is Joseph, just like the father of Jesus. He's also the great disciple, which is the name means, and he comes and asks the Romans to take down the body so we can give him proper burial. We have a mimesis there. Dr. Ruck, what do you think about that when you hear that? Any thoughts?
Well, the fact that Achilles gives up the body after he's mutilated it and taken out his rage is his acceptance of the fact that he's human. And I think that there is a thoroughgoing theme in Greek Hellenism that, as great as it might be to be a god, and some heroes did become gods, Heracles became a god, the gods aren't that great. They are amoral. And we, as humans, can conceive of something better. It may be worthless in terms of the cosmos, because the cosmos is amoral. But that doesn't matter. We stand up and say, I was here, I objected. I don't like the conflagration of the spheres. My testimony doesn't change the way the world's going to be, but somehow I stand beyond it and say, I condemn it. This is the way it should be. And it's the elevation of the human above the divine.
Wow.
But that's what when we study the humanities, that's what we're studying.
There's another branch, of course, of ancient religion, and this goes back to Plato's Socrates in large measure. And I think this simply underscores what you said. Namely, one of Socrates' complaints about the Homeric epics, according to Plato, is the immorality of the deities. And so his idealism, as a way of talking about hatheos, is a corrective on that. And it's actually a projection of the kalos, the beauty, onto the deity to make it the deity perfection. And this is another branch that influences at least later Christian theology, where you have this idealism, so that predicates of the God have to be all positive. But it's a reaction to just what you said, that the gods are amoral in the Homeric epic, much more like humans, but humans actually can have more moral agency and sophistication than the deities.
Astrology assumes that the position of the constellations and celestial phenomena are a reflection of what occurs beneath on the earth. And there is the possibility that if you change what is beneath on the earth, since there's that relationship, you move the cosmos. So we could produce a decent deity if we wished.
Well, not only that, there are times where mortals do things on Earth, and Zeus takes action and puts them up in the constellations. Like he makes them he puts them into the stars, so they'll forever be remembered.
Yes.
So I think that adds to what you're saying. I thought about something that Dr. McDonald was saying, and I wonder what you both think about this. In the symposium, there's this giant banquet scene where Socrates talks about the firstborn god love, and how great love is, and how underrated this god is, and basically saying that when people love each other, the societies are better, the military is better because they fight for their families more often, and everything just works out better with this god, with this firstborn god love. And I'm wondering if there's any connection with this banquet scene in the symposium as there is in the Gospels with the Last Supper, maybe.
Let me, Carl, if I might, tell Neil what we talked about 2 days ago in terms of the symposium.
Yeah.
The symposium is really a masterpiece, in my view.
Absolutely.
And here we have a drinking party of guys who got drunk the night before and decided they're not going to get drunk today. Instead, they're going to talk about eros,
yes,
about love. And of course, when naughty boys get together and drink, they often talk about their sexual exploits. Now they're going to talk about love, and it includes homosexual love and mythologies of, let's say, Aristophanes, and so on. And then Socrates talks about what he learned from a courtesan, an aged woman. And this goes back to what Carl talked about in terms of the wisdom of old women. And she helps him understand the cosmic side of beauty, post-sexuality, actually, and an idealization of love and a projection of the good, which we talked about before, so that now love becomes a metaphysical phenomenon that one should strive for. And I may be butchering all of this, Carl, but I think it really is magnificent. Now, when you have in 1 Corinthians, Paul has this famous love chapter, chapter 13. What people haven't taken account of, it's on either side of his talking about the Eucharist and the Christian feast. And I really think it's based on the symposium tradition. And other people have suggested this too, but I don't think they've pressed it far enough to see that really this is a Christian version of a symposium. And the way Paul talks about it is really quite similar to what Socrates talks about it. It's an idealization. It has a metaphysical property, and it's the summum bonum of ethics for Paul. And so, Carl, I don't know if you've thought about that piece of it, but it actually bends back into our discussion of the Eucharist.
Plato is a very strange person, because everything that he wrote we have, except for the tragedy that he destroyed. And we have a few things that aren't by him that are in the corpus as well. Then many people told stories about him. So if there were anything, even if it were not true, it would come along in the tradition. He did not get married. And as far as we know, he did not have a physical boyfriend. The only person he ever was in love with was Socrates, and there's no ever indication that there was anything physical. What kind of person has no sex, yet is an expert on love? What is it that Plato is in love with? He knows what orgasm is. What is he experiencing? He's experiencing some kind of orgasmic union with what he describes. What can't be described, the ineffable. Well,
No, it's fine.
Dennis and I talked about the Eucharist and whether the incorporation of reminiscences of Euripides' Bacchae in the Christian writings were merely verbal reminiscences, or whether there's an assimilation of what might be called Bacchic mystery into the Christian mystery. And I brought up the problem of Paul and the congregation at Corinth, where he reprimands the Corinthians. He established Christianity 10 years earlier. He's returned and he tells them they're not doing the Eucharist right. Corinth is a short distance from Eleusis. The people who are now Christians were, before that, Greeks. They would have been initiated into Eleusis. Or in any case, you cannot speak of mystery in Corinth without your audience immediately thinking of the nearby Eleusinian mystery. And he says the reason he knows they're doing it wrong is that quite a few of them have become sick, and some have even died. And I mentioned that you could take this metaphorically, that they've died spiritually, but that doesn't seem to be what he's saying. How could you die from doing the Eucharist? And is it likely that when you speak about a mystery in Corinth, it would have to be against the backdrop of the Eleusinian mystery, where there was a Eucharistic sacrament, which was apparently something that altered consciousness and gave you a vision. So what are they doing in Corinth?
Yeah. Another thing. So that's a really good question, and I wonder if we'll ever know if there was some other type of Eucharist that's different from what we see today. But also, what I think is important about the Eucharist is I think that the eternal life aspect, and I from what I've gathered in the Eleusinian reading about the mysteries of Eleusis, is that when they took part in the rite of the drinking the taking the rite basically of Demeter, who I think is the grain, and Dionysus, who is the wine, they'd be granted eternal life, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they would walk away from this experience after they would have their breakthrough experience, their awe and amazement of what they saw. And it says clearly that the people who are initiated in these rites were no longer afraid of death at that point. They were saved, if you will.
Yeah, in Euripides' Ion, I mean, no one could reveal what happened at the Eleusinian Mysteries under pain of death, although we do know that it became a scandal that people were doing it privately with drinking friends at their homes. So it was something that you could abuse. But in Euripides' Ion, poetically, he says that when you pass through the portal into the hall of initiation, you will see the stars dance. And the hall has a solid roof. You cannot see the stars dancing unless you have passed through the roof. That is, say, a spiritual journey to the cosmos. That's what the experience was.
Right.
That's not possible, is it? Of course not. So I haven't revealed the mystery because you know that it's not possible. Or is it possible? Are we talking about detachment of consciousness from the body to have a mystical union? And actually, Plato's always talking about that too, isn't he?
I want to follow up on that if I can, Neil.
Absolutely.
By the importance of the mysteries includes not just Eleusis, but potentially Mithras. And Mithraism is really fascinating because some of the Mithraea that we know about have vaulted ceilings with stars that on the top of the roof. And the primary cultic image that is used is of Mithras slaying a bull with a solar image overlooking it, that is Helios or Sol, because most of the texts are in Latin. But you also, that is Helios or Sol, because most of the texts are in Latin. But you also have the Dioscuri on either side of the image. And the Dioscuri, Castor and Polydeuces, are important because they share one immortality and one mortality. That is, on alternating days, one is alive and the other is dead. And the Mithraea became important primarily to soldiers. And as far as we know, all devotees of Mithras were men, and a large percentage of them were soldiers. Now, why would that cult be so important to them? Because their jobs required them to lay down their lives potentially. And so that the Mithras cult, in my view, is basically a death cult that's related to soldiers to give them this promise of immortality. It has its own mysteries. It has its own mythological allegory, which is not expressed really in narrative, but it's in these rituals. And what Carl had talked about in terms of the stars on these in the vaults, a feeling of immortality that comes with the esoteric information from the mysteries must have been an encouragement to these men who were about to face death. And I think you have the same thing in the Gospel of Mark, where James and John want to play the role of the Dioscuri by sitting at Jesus's right and left hand in glory. And Jesus says, nope, those seats are reserved for the martyrs, those who die. And so that the echoes of Mithras, I think, are really quite fascinating.
And later on, if I'm not mistaken, and I want to get your response to that, Dr. Ruck. But later on, when you see the time of Constantine, from what I've gathered, this is the number one population of Christians are the soldiers. It sweeps across the Roman soldier world, this this religion that guarantees salvation just merely in faith. And for some reason, for a type of person who's living the life of someone who's going to lay down their life for the cause, this is a popular idea because all I have to do is believe, and I can fight to the death now, and I'm not worried about it anymore. But
Yeah.
Dr. Ruck, what do you think about all that?
Yes, I think that Paul was probably initiated into Mithraism. His father was a tent maker, not poor, but if you were a tent maker, you were a munitions supplier for the Roman army. So he did not come from a poor background. It's obvious that he doesn't come from a poor background because he's well educated. His Greek is fantastic. And probably as a young man, he had relations with Roman soldiers and was initiated into their cult. I think that Mithraism and Christianity are very similar. They're Hellenistic assimilations of an exotic tradition. So Persian traditions and Judaic traditions, those are exotic, but they've been given a Hellenistic form. And as far as what was involved in the Mithraic initiation, the paintings of the celestial realm on the ceiling of the initiation chamber, of course, makes one think of the cave of Plato, and the fact that you see those representations on the wall of the cave, but you're supposed to either pass through them or be forcibly taken out of the cave, and you realize that what you saw wasn't reality, and then you dropped the bombshell that, now you have to understand that this is the cave, and what you're seeing isn't reality. But so what about Mithraism? He was born from a pine cone, which is rather strange. And how does he kill the bull? With a barbed sword or with a pruning hook? Why does he kill the bull with an implement that you would use for picking a plant? Did he kill a bull, or did he pick a plant that has a zoomorphic manifestation as a bull? And such a plant clearly is associated with Dionysus. And so what is that bull plant? Well, I've gone on to try to show that the metaphors indicate what it is, but we don't have to identify it. It's just very suspicious that the hero has killed supposedly a bull with an inappropriate implement.
If I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard from other people who are into the Mithra side of scholarship that there's something to do with the red and white colors and the Amanita muscaria mushroom being central to this Mithraism. Do you know about this, or is this just some...
Oh, yes, we have argued that. I left out the detail that he kneels on the bull as he picks it with his pruning hook, so that he has only one foot, and he is characterized by having a red Phrygian cap. So is he an anthropomorphism of the sacrament that he is harvesting? As far as harvesting the bull with a pruning hook, the devotees of Dionysus were supposed to have caught animals with their bare hands. And one of the animals that they caught and pulled to pieces was a bull. Now, come on now.
Wow. And
I would not, no matter how many men I had with me, I don't think we would want to engage a bull and try to pull it apart. Even if we could grab onto it, it's very hard to pull a living creature, a large living creature. Even a rabbit would be hard to pull apart, but certainly a big creature, you can't do it. So it is a metaphor for something else.
And why does the author of Matthew go out of his way to tell you that these three magi, who are probably depicted wearing Phrygian caps? What is the purpose of that part?
Why do the magi show up? Because it's an attempt to show that Zoroastrianism is recognizing the new version of the Savior.
What do you think about that, Dr. McDonald?
Indicating Jesus as a replacement of Mithras.
So basically they're saying that, okay, Zoroastrian magi, who are wise men, who know how to read the stars, even they are coming to Jesus.
They're Zoroastrian priests.
Right. So is that the point of that? Is they're saying that these wise men who interpret the stars also know that this is the true Messiah?
Be a Christian instead of a Zoroastrian.
Okay. What about you, Dr. McDonald? Do you think anything that we missed on this part?
I want to make a meta statement about Professor Ruck's approach and mine that's intended to be generous, but it could be understood to be agonistic. And that is that Professor Ruck is primarily what I would say interested in a history of religions and a mythological history approach. And there are certain psychological pieces of that he's explored, and I have great respect for that, Carl. My own approach is more mimetic, and that is how does the literature that we have evoke, that is by early Christians and Jews, evoke the great literatures of Hellenism and later Roman writing, and where can we see the cultural interplay of texts? So that is less a history of religions approach than it is a comparative literary approach. Now, I only flag that to say that both approaches are important.
Absolutely.
And I don't hear Professor Ruck demeaning the mimetic, but he brings a much wider collection of concerns and so on from which I am learning. But I also think that the advantage of a mimetic approach is that you can draw more solid lines between the mythologies and the literature, and one can see how early Christians are trying to reappropriate what by that time had already become classics. Now, here's how that works with the Magi, in my view. It is possible that you have a history of religions approach, which is the one that I heard Carl articulating primarily. But we also know that there are texts that talk about Mithridates and Magi and cosmic phenomena. And I wouldn't be surprised that there's some kind of literary background that is known. The origin of Alexander the Great and his the reception in the East also comes to mind. So I have not worked on this directly so much myself. I had a doctoral student who did pursue it in terms of the Alexander background, and there are others who have emphasized Mithridates. So I would be looking somewhat more than Carl apparently does for the literary antecedents as opposed to a history of religions model. So if I were to work on that question, that's probably where I'd be looking to the text that became widespread.
Yeah, there's a text from 157 BC, I believe that's the date, about Mithridates' birth. And there's a star in the sky signifying a new king is born. And I think that's what you're getting at. I think it's probably maybe what your doctoral student was talking about too. I do want to get into Apollo.
He's a very complex deity. We've barely begun talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to real quick before I wanted to touch on Apollo. Seems like he's portrayed as like sort of like an opposite to Dionysus. And I wonder if there's something going on that we see the Gospels with Jesus as well. Is there anything going on with that? Apollo very does feel like a proto-Jesus character in a way.
Yeah, you can't have perfection unless you have the recipient of your rejected, less than perfect characteristics. And the relationship between Apollo and Dionysus is that they are really the same deity. But Dionysus is the one that could bear the burden of Apollo's darker persona. And so as a half-brother of Apollo, he's very close to him. His closeness is that he's willing to take on the dark shadow that Apollo himself, in order to be absolutely perfect, cannot bear. Dionysus plays the role of Pentheus as regards to Apollo.
My response to you, Neil, would be somewhat different again. Think of Nietzsche and his distinction between the Dionysian and the Apollonian, which has become problematic at a theoretical level. But on the other hand, in the Acts of the Apostles, in chapter 16, Paul is freed from a prison. Later on, when he talks about this event, he actually quotes from the Bacchae, "It's hard for you to kick against the goads." And then in the very next chapter, Paul is in Athens disputing with philosophers, and he's playing a role that's similar to Socrates. So here you have, I think, in the Acts of the Apostles, an imitation of the Dionysian, where Paul himself is playing the role of a Dionysus, who was famous in antiquity for madness, drunkenness, and cavorting, and so on. And then all of a sudden, Paul becomes more Apollonian, if you will. Apollo was a god of many things, including archery, but also the lyre and philosophy. So I think you do have, with my apologies to how Nietzsche would have understood this, I think you have a combination in the Acts of the Apostles of the Dionysian with madness early on, including glossolalia or xenolalia in Jerusalem, moving toward the philosophical. So at the end of the Acts of the Apostles, Paul gives apologiae very much like Plato's apology for Socrates, it seems to me, where he's trying to justify himself and talks about how he used to be Dionysian, or like a Pentheus, trying to kill the Christian movement and so on. But then he had a vision like Pentheus did, but Pentheus rejected it. Paul accepts it, but now he's, more of a philosopher. So I actually think you have these things blending into each other in a mimetic masterpiece in the Acts of the Apostles. That would be my read of it.
And real quick, I want to hear what you think, Dr. Ruck, but I wanted to say, I think that it seems like there's like an order and chaos duality going on there with Dionysus and Apollo. But with Jesus, he says that he's the true vine. And then in other parts in the Gospels, and this is both in John, by the way, he says he's the true vine in John, but also in John chapter 8, he says, "I am the light of the world." And I almost wonder if the author of John, is saying that he is Dionysus and he's Apollo. He's both in one. He's the whole package. You don't need Dionysus and Apollo anymore. You got Jesus now. What do you guys think about that? Dr. Ruck, what do you think about that?
Yeah, because Apollo and Dionysus are the same deity. What I would like to ask Dennis is whether he thinks that it is possible that in some forms of the performance of the Eucharist in early Christianity, and perhaps surviving in special cults through the ages. The intoxicant was, the Eucharist was intoxicating.
I think it's fascinating to say, though, that the use of potentially mind-altering substances it appears in Judaism, it appears in early Christianity, it appears in Eleusis, the Eleusinian Mysteries. So it can't be by accident that you have certain kinds of mind-altering substance ingestion involved in these rites. Now, I know that Professor Ruck has argued that these rites are intentionally intoxicating. And by the way, you have it at Eleusis too. And that, in fact, there may have been adjusting drugs added on into the wine or the beer, or we have it in peyote, of course, in Native American religion.
And in the Indian religion,
I wouldn't be surprised that you have it as more mind-altering, but I don't know at this point enough to be able to talk wisely about it.
And I think that another thing is, you got this kykeon drink that they're using in mysteries, just like they have the Veda or the soma juice in the Vedic mythology. And I wonder, and maybe Dr. Ruck has an answer for this, why wouldn't they continue if you're going to reappropriate the Eucharist, and this is a sacred thing going back centuries and centuries, right? And if you're going to reappropriate it for this new religion, why wouldn't you sort of, I mean, at least, maybe not all the locations, but you would think there'd be some locations in Turkey or Greece that are going to continue this. Is there any texts that talk about this, or any evidence of this, or do we not know?
We can look for indications of hidden message in works of art. We can also look at modern Christian religions, the Mormons, Joseph Smith, their own historians. So when you prove that this is the origin of the religion, the Mormons are obviously not supportive of intoxication. Right. But that is not true of Joseph Smith, who founded Mormonism. And their own historians trace his religious mission probably back to inebriation by means of a mushroom.
That's fascinating.
I didn't know that.
Very fascinating stuff.
So Mormons are intelligent at university, and some of their own historians quite openly have written about this. Yes.
Wow, that is some eye-opening stuff that people who are watching should definitely go and explore. Go and read about this stuff. Both of you have written numerous books on these subjects. Dennis in the mimesis side, and Dr. Ruck in the sort of ritual side, because you guys are both sort of looking at sort of the same thing in different methods and different approaches to it.
Scratched the surface, haven't we?
Yeah, I agree.
But if the Eucharist was intoxicating, psychoactive, it doesn't mean that Christianity is a phony religion.
Sure.
It means that Christianity was a religion.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it makes it any worse or better. I think it is what it is. That's just what it was, if that's the case. I just think they're just, it's just the ritual aspect. That's,
That I hope your viewers understand how wonderful it is to explore this literature and this background, and to get away from the kind of dogmatism about religion that we're right and so others are wrong, because religion has been used as such a divisive and toxic topic. And I think what we're talking about, Carl, I hope you would agree with this, is a much more nuanced and sophisticated and less dogmatic way of appreciating ancient religion, and one that has to do much more with our humanity than it does with the statements about truth and the divine revelation and so on.
And today's topic is centered on his book titled The Apples of Apollo, Pagan and Christian Mysteries of the Eucharist. The link to purchase the book is in the description below. That being said, let's get started. Can you tell us a bit about the complex ritual surrounding Dionysus?
Like all of us, we have our dominant persona, which is the face that we present to the world, but we also have a number of recessive faces that we, if we are healthy beings, we're aware of, and we can have dialogues with, and they don't threaten us. But if we are unaware of them, they can rise up and cause psychosis in your outward persona. And so Dionysus is sort of a model for psychic health. There are two names for the god. They don't refer to the same entity. With the name Bacchus, he has the connotations of primitivism and irrationality and sleep. The women who were called mad women or maenads worshipped him by going away from civilization to what represented the wilderness, a mountain side, and there they entered an extreme state of mental derangement. They are never called Dionysians; they are called Bacchants. The Bacchus is a name that probably can be connected with the Greek word for, which is very much like it, Bacchus, that denotes a branch of a plant that's wielded as a religious emblem. And we know what that branch would be in the case of the Bacchants. They have characteristically, they're depicted and they apparently carried a wand which is called a thyrsus, Thyrsus. That word is cognate with our word torso. Torso is the body of one of us without its legs and arms, so the essential body. That's what its etymological meaning is. We know what it was used for, however. It was depicted and it's described as the stalk of a giant fennel into which plants have been stuffed. And it was the symbolic container. I mean, in actual fact, they may have used baskets or bags, but it had the symbolism of what you put the wild plants that you gathered into. So it indicates that the Bacchants, or the maenads, were symbolically gathering wild plants. We know what the wild plant prototypically was. It often is depicted and also described as being stuffed with ivy leaves. That mountain ceremony for the Bacchants was only for women. We know what metaphorically what happens from many vase paintings. They're being attacked sexually. But the creatures who are attacking them are not of our realm of reality. They are goatmen like satyrs, or horsemen like silines. And it's interesting also that the women seem to have no trouble beating off the advances of these creatures. So they're not really being victimized. They're playing and knocking them away from themselves. Another name is synonymous with the thyrsus was the narthex. And the narthex has the apparent etymology of being the place, the thex, as in a biblioteca, a place where you put books, the place where you put the narcotic. And so that, together with the thyrsus, would indicate that these bacchants or maenads were gathering wild plants, and prototypic of the wild plant was the ivy. And that what they were experiencing was some kind of sexual orgasm. But since the attackers are not of our realm of existence, it's imaginary, a metaphor for what they were actually experiencing, which was a cosmological union with their deity. And he is seen for these, he's shown for these scenes always in a particular way. He's obviously male because he's bearded, but he's dressed as a woman. In addition to being dressed as a woman, he usually has a leopard skin thrown over his back or his arm. So not only is he a male who dresses as a woman, as such, mediating between the sexes and posing no oppositional threat to his union with the women, but actually the ideal lover, since he knows what it is to be a woman, but he's obviously a male. But also the leopard skin indicates that he's partially bestial or wild rather than cultivated. I mean, that has all to do with the whole symbolism of what the Bacchants were doing. Now that is one version of his name. The other version of his name is Dionysus. And the women on the mountain are never called Dionysians. Dionysus, however, is the god who presides over the theater. It's the theater of Dionysus, not the theater of Bacchus. Many times people who don't know now might use them interchangeably, but they're not interchangeable. It's the theater of Dionysus, not the theater of Bacchus. Now the name Dionysus has an interesting etymology. The story about Dionysus is that he was inseminated in his mother's Semele by a lightning bolt from Zeus. And the lightning bolt, as you might imagine, destroyed her. But Zeus took the fetus that he had engendered in her womb and took it out of her body and sewed it into his leg, where it grew to term, and then he extracted it. And when he extracted it, there were people watching it. So he is a testifiable child of a father, which is totally unnatural for us humans. You know who the mother is, because you see the child coming out of the female, but you know who the father is only if you have subjected the woman to the rites of matrimony, so that the man owns her, and anything that comes from his womb, he can vouch to be from him. And in classical society, the women were ordinarily sequestered in the house of their husband. Yet, for the Maenadic Bacchant revel, they left the house and went out to the mountain and had this revel. The revel was called a komos, and komos is probably cognate with our word coma. And so it has of course, the meaning of an ecstatic sexual romp, but it also is associated with that part of our consciousness which is unconscious. There's a mystery about our existence that we cannot stay awake forever. We have to go to sleep. If we don't go to sleep, the imaginings that work out during our sleep surface in our waking state, and we become crazy. It's not that you have to go to sleep so your body repairs itself. It repairs itself when you're awake just as well. So Dionysus, with the name, the first part of his name, belongs to his father Zeus. He's named after his father, where we are in patriarchal traditions. That Dios beginning of the name has lost the W sound, so it's actually dios. And that word is cognate in Indo-European languages with the word for day, dies, and it's so much associated with the idea of divinity that it's the source of divine. So we've inherited this association of divinity with celestial existence and with daylight, and so on. He is never depicted as Dionysus, wearing a dress, bearded with a dress and that leopard skin. Instead, he's depicted as an idealized adolescent, nude male youth. So he's thoroughly humanized and definitely male. The second part of his name, however, the Nissos, that is related to Nyssa. And Nyssa is the fantasy land of sleep. It's the land of nod. There's a Greek verb, nistazo, which means to fall asleep. So with his name, he mediates the realm of the unconscious, the realm of the female, and daylight, rational consciousness of his celestial father, Zeus. Dionysus, however, is a great mediator. And so his mother, who was destroyed, he eventually, Dionysus, not Bacchus, but Dionysus, will go into the underworld and find the remains of his mother and resurrect her to the celestial realm. And then she changes her name to Theone. Theone means, Semele is apparently the name, a name of the great goddess. With the name Theone, she is designated as the celestial being, the celestial female. So in his patronage of the theater, the theater is the materialization into our reality of events from a mythical, imaginary reality. The theater itself in Athens, there were two of them. Usually they are not connected to this topography, but at the top of, at the base of a cliff below which each of those theaters expands. One is the 5th century theater of Dionysus, and the second one is a Hellenistic period, Roman time theater of Herodotus Atticus. Both of them have a cave, and we know those caves were sacred. The sanctity goes way back from archaeological remains. And we know about the cave above this, the theater of Dionysus, that it is probably connected to a cave on the island of Salamis, where Euripides' family had an estate. They were wealthy, landed people. And yet there's the tradition that it was in this cave that Euripides composed his dramas. The cave was in use since great antiquity, so it was a sacred cave. And you don't have to go into a cave in order to have enough concentration or solitude to write, nor can you write in a cave, it's too dark. But in addition to that, there was the tradition that he kept his library there. Now that would be absolutely ridiculous. His family had a fine house. You'd keep valuable manuscripts in your house. You wouldn't put them in a damp cave where you couldn't read them anyway, and where they deteriorate from the moisture. So what was he doing in the cave? He was making his dramas, but making his drama doesn't mean writing them. It means getting the inspiration. And what occurred to him in whatever trance state he entered of inspiration in the cave, he then materialized onto the stage in his productions for the stage. So the cave at the top of the theaters makes the theater like the emanation from what originated in the cave. In fact, the seating area, the rounded area where you sit in the theater, is called the cavea, or in Latin, or the cave. And it could be simply because it's concave, but when you put it together with this, it looks like there might be an additional reason why it's called the cave. The Greeks called it the theatron. Doesn't have the same metaphor. It's just a place where you watch things. Now, with regard to that, one can consider, and I've written about this, that Plato gave up being a dramatist. He was well respected as a dramatist and had been chosen as one of the 3 poets who was going to have their play put on at public expense in the festival. But he stopped being a dramatist when he realized the irrationality involved in the trial of Socrates. In the trial, you had to first decide whether he was guilty of corrupting the youth. And so the vote was taken, and Socrates, by majority of the jurors, was found guilty. But the second stage was that you had to then propose what your penalty was going to be. And Socrates, as Plato narrates it, argued that he had tried to show that he'd done a good thing rather than a bad thing. And therefore, the only kind of penalty for a benefit that you're offering to the people is not a punishment, but a reward. So he proposed that the city of Athens support him and feed him, house and feed him for the rest of his life. This so infuriated the jurors that more people voted to put him to death than originally thought he was guilty. That is complete irrationality, and Plato realized it was the irrationality caused by mythopoetic presentation. They were not thinking rationally, they were thinking mythopoetically. And so he stopped writing dramas. He did, however, continue to write dramas, because that's the reason why the dialogues are dialogues. They're plays, but not for the theater. It is likely, as a poet of the generation after Euripides, that he was a friend of Euripides. It's even likely that he may have attended whatever it was that Euripides did in his cave. Euripides may have not been alone. And his allegory of the cave then has great sense. The people in the cave are like people in a theater watching a projection of shadows on a wall, and they think that that is reality. And you have to drag them out of the cave and show them this outside world with the sun and so forth. At first, they don't like it because it's too hard to see, too much light and so forth. And then they finally get used to it. Oh, yeah, I thought that was reality, and this is reality. And then Plato says, yeah, but this is the cave now, and this is not reality. This is just a reflection of the true reality. So it is this mediating figure of Dionysus, who is the great intermediary. Now, with regard to plants, the thyrsus, which is the emblem of the herb gatherers, wild plants, is stuffed with ivy leaves, and the ivy is a plant that resembles the grapevine. However, it's different from the grape. It's wild, and it produces berries which are shriveled, not juicy. And the ivy and its berries are toxic to eat, whereas the vine, you can eat the leaves in Dolmadakia, the modern Greek cuisine, and you can drink the juice of the grapes, and that is obviously not poisonous. But you can't, the ivy, the grape does not produce grapes unless you prune it annually. So you can't let it be a wild plant. It wants to go wild. It wants to become the ivy, but you intervene and each year force it back into being something civilized. That's why vineyards have those stumps, thick stems, from which the grapes grow, but those are pruned back every year to grow over again. So it's a civilized plant, a cultivated plant. And then upon the juice of the cultivated plant, you can grow a intoxicant by the action of fermenting the fermenting yeast. The Greeks were aware of the fact that yeast was a fungal growth. It was like cooking. There's a distinction between primitive people who eat their food raw and civilized people who cook it. And so cooking is a way of moving from primitivism to civilization. And fermentation produces bubbles as if it were boiling. It's like cooking. And then on it, it produces ethanol, which is an intoxicant. However, that's interesting enough in itself, but the Greeks didn't drink their wine as simply the ethanol fermentation. They did a very strange thing. They mixed their wine with 3 or 4 parts water. Anyone who drinks wine knows that if you mix it with 4 parts water, it doesn't taste like wine, and it's not very intoxicating. By natural fermentation, you can get only at the most 13% ethanol. You can get higher concentration only if you distill it. That was an art that was learned in the Middle Ages. It was associated with alchemy. It was unknown in antiquity, so it's only simple fermentation. You dilute it with that much water, and you have a very weak and tasteless drink. However, it was not weak and tasteless. We know how much you had to drink in order to get quite intoxicated. And the Greeks, for drinking wine, there are different vessels depending on the ceremony, but the ordinary civilized way of having drinking Dionysus was a party only for men, as contrasted to the Mænadic ceremony, which is only for women. The wild ceremony is only for women, but the symposium only for men, or for women who are not bound into subjugation by the rite of matrimony. These were educated women who were called female companions. They were to think of them as prostitutes or whores is doing a disservice, because unlike the ordinary wedded female, these were women who had been educated, and they competed with men intellectually, and were of high status, so that Pericles, who gives his name to the classical age as the Periclean age, he divorced his wife and took up openly living with his hetaira, whose name was Aspasia. We know that the intoxication was real, and you drank it in this for the symposium out of a culex. Culex it resembles our wine glass. It has the same meaning ritually as the wine glass. If you want to drink something that's going to get you drunk, drink from a mug. If you have a wine glass, you might toss it over, but that's the whole point. In a cocktail party, you're supposed to drink but not get drunk, and the glass challenged you not to be drunk. So the culex was even more unstable than our wine glass, since it was a broad saucer on a stem. You didn't drink as much as you wanted at the symposium. Your host just decided how many rounds of drinks there would be. It would be ladled out, and then you drank it and continued being brilliant intellectually, but you were challenging it. The reason that it was so intoxicating is that in the mixing ceremony with water, they added flavoring herbs, and many of them we can document as being toxic. And so it was a mixture of the product of civilization, the grape, its juice, the fermentation, and the wild antecedents of cultivation, the primitive wild plants. In fact, the agent of fermentation is the fungus of yeast, which is the wildest of all plants because it has no discernible seeds. It seems to just pop up by itself from the forest floor. And yet that wildest of wild plants has been subdued into cultivation in the manipulation of the yeast producing ethanol. So what wine represented was civilization, intelligence, male dominance, and the evolution towards the higher nature of our humanness. Whereas you cannot, however, have one aspect without paying attention to the opposite. I began by saying that the God has two identities, and that there are many identities within us. In order to correctly enjoy the benefits of the altered consciousness of Dionysus as the god of civilization and the drama, you have to give an equal respect to his precedent, his primitive nature. And those women on the mountain were doing, we cannot know except by metaphor. We do know that they got very intoxicated. Historical account, not a poetic account. They came down from the mountain one time into a village that was at war, so there was a garrison of soldiers there. And the women in the town, recognizing the deranged state of the Bacchants, formed a protective band around them as they passed out in the village square. So they were really drunk. And when they woke up, they protected them so that the men would not molest them. But how did they get so drunk? We don't know. We know that they are never shown drinking wine. The god is shown for those rebels with a wine cup. He doesn't use something like the kykeon, like our wine glass. He has a large vessel called a cantharus, which has two big handles on each side. And he sometimes is shown drunken, holding that. But the women are not drinking. It would be difficult also. They're never shown drinking, but you have to imagine that it would be difficult for them to drink because you'd have to cart the wine up to the mountain, somehow distribute it. That just wasn't done. What were they doing? Perhaps just getting together with other women, and whatever dancing and singing they did, freed from the house and that sort of, maybe that was enough to trigger their intoxication. But probably not. Probably they did have something, and if they were physically inducing the intoxication, it would have to be with the primitive antecedents of viticulture, and those would be the wild herbs that they're gathering in the thyrsus and the narthex. And most prototypic of wild plants would be fungus. So it is perhaps not without meaning that the stipe, which is the stem of the mushroom, is called its thyrsus, making the mushroom itself, as the Greeks saw it, a miniature thyrsus with the toxic herbs in its top. In the case of the mushroom probably involved, it's the fly agaric, and the toxins of the fly agaric mushroom, the Amanita muscaria, are confined mainly to the red rind of its cap. So it makes a perfect miniature exemplar of a thyrsus. I've gone on at great length, but yeah, that's what there's more to say, but that's in the direction of what I'd like to say.
What is important about Caesar's reports regarding the Druids?
That gives us information about another aspect of the same Indo-European people that the Greeks are, and that the people of India are. That's why they're called Indo-European. Dionysus, and there's a myth, in fact, about Dionysus, that he went to India and came back with his gift. And so the sacred plant of the Indian tradition, which is soma or halma, is probably the same magical plant that we're talking about with regard to the Greeks. I mean, there were many herbs that were intoxicating that they would know about. Some of them purely symbolic, some of them actually intoxicating. But the wildest of the wild plants would be the fungus. And it is probable that the soma halma was the fire agaric mushroom. Now, going back to the thyrsus, the top of it could be stuffed with ivy leaves, and I explained what the significance of that would be, but it could be replaced with a pine cone. I didn't say that the thyrsus, as cognate with torso, represents the essential body of someone, and so it's not hard to see that the essential body of this stalk, with regard to a man, would be not just the torso, but it would be the phallus or the penis erect from between his legs. In fact, when Zeus sows the fetus that he inseminated in Semele into his thigh, that's probably a euphemism for between his thighs. And we have vase paintings showing the next generation sitting in the lap of Dionysus, standing right where his penis would be. And the next generation, his own son, is called Bunch of Grapes or Staphylos. And he's shown offering the god the cantharus vessel from which the god Bacchus drinks. And he holds a vine of grape. So the grape is the second generation. So back to the Druids. Why the pine cone? The pine cone probably because the mushroom grows in a special mycorrhizal association with the roots of certain trees. Amongst those are the pine. And so that is probably why the pine cone. And as for the Druids, we know that they worshipped the oak tree. The oak is another one of the hosts for the mushroom. So the Druidic tradition is probably another version of the same Dionysian tradition that we have documented for the Greeks and probably also for the people of the Indus Valley. That help?
Yeah, sure does. Can you tell us about Perseus, the mushroom picker?
Yeah. Perseus is known for his confrontation with the Gorgon Medusa. And the Gorgon Medusa, Medusa means that she's a queen. She's a version of the Great Mother. She's been demonized by being made ugly. The particular form of her ugliness is eyes that will turn you to stone, staring at you, and a mouth with teeth. The mouth with teeth is easily seen as the male's fear of injecting the penis into the vulva. It's the fear of the female that grabs onto you and won't let you out again, or the emasculating female. She is a zoomorphic, because she flies, anthropomorphism of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. And Perseus picks that mushroom and then uses it as a symbolic emblem to introduce patriarchy from matriarchy. After he's confronted the Gorgon Medusa, he flies off on a magical horse, which also emerged when he cut off the Gorgon Medusa's head, a magical horse emerged, quite clearly indicating that the confrontation with the Gorgon Medusa produces ecstatic flight. Horses don't ordinarily fly. He flies off on that horse, and then as he looks down, he sees a female whose name is Andromeda. The first part of her name is easily seen, even if you don't know Greek, as an anthropoid. It's man, on andrology, I mean. And the second part is the Medusa, Medusa, Meda, Andromeda. And he shows that Gorgon head to the beast that's threatening Andromeda, frees her, and then she becomes changed from her role in matriarchy to patriarchy. He flies off with her as his bride. So the function of the Amanita clearly has to do with the coming of Indo-European traditions of patriarchy and the transition from the entheogen in its connotations in the matriarchal female-dominant society, of which we have ample evidence from archaeological sites such as Knossos, the Palace of Minos, changes that to the patriarchal tradition of classical society. The interesting thing about classical patriarchalism, however, is that it is not totally patriarchal. It makes these mediations with primitivism as they saw it. I don't mean to say that female dominance is primitive, but historically, for the Greek lands, it was earlier than male dominance. And with wild nature, and certainly before we learned the art of cultivation, we did live off of wild things. It makes a mediation with that. It doesn't destroy it. It honors it and transmutes it. The greatest transmutation is the birth of Athena. Like Dionysus, who had a witnessed birth from his father, totally unnatural, she too had that kind of birth. And she dresses as a man. She's a warrior. She will always testify that the father is the parent because she didn't have a mother. And she wears as a commemoration of her own primitivism, because you always have to mediate with the other, even though she's so totally made over into this patriarchal daughter. She wears a commemoration of her former identity, the Gorgon head on her breastplate. And if you do not honor her correctly, instead of being the goddess who inspires you with intellect and rationality, she turns against you and becomes a goddess of madness and plunges you into irrationality, intoxication, and so on.
What are the parallels between the serpent in the garden with Cadmos's Theban serpent?
Yeah, the serpent in the garden is either archetypal or it may be influenced by the fact that the Jews were influenced by Greek models, probably archetypal, or it has to do with the fact that Jewish people went through the same transition from matriarchal dominance to patriarchal, which is quite likely. The serpent is the one that offers knowledge. Now, why would a serpent offer knowledge? It means that it changes the way you think. And that would mean that the way that you think might be altered by your state of consciousness. The apple that you're not supposed to pick because you'll learn things, you'd be a fool not to eat it. And so that serpent with Eve is a continuation of the same motif that we see, for example, in at Knossos, where we have archaeological remains of the pre-Greek inhabitants of the Greek lands, the Minoan people, and many representations of the priestess or the goddess who was not bound by male patriarchy, since she freely exposes her breasts. It's the patriarchy that requires that the female clothe her body. And she handles serpents. They're twisted around her arms, or she holds it in her hands. And again, what is the serpent? It's hard, not all serpents are toxic, but it's hard not to, as a metaphor, see that it does involve toxicity, the alteration of consciousness. That doesn't mean to say drunkenness, because inspiration or celestial ideas are equally an alteration of consciousness. Yeah, okay. So what the serpent is offering is the entheogen, and you're not supposed to have it because your intelligence will threaten the dominance of the patriarchal God.
How is the golden fleece connected to the golden apple?
When Perseus plucks the golden fleece, it's the same thing as plucking. I mean, why would it be hanging on a tree? He is plucking something that grows on the tree, and it has to do with gathering the entheogen. And so the fleece is a zoomorphism of a botanical agent. That's why it's hanging on a tree.
Can you tell us a bit about the golden apples of Atalanta?
It's the same idea. Now, why are they golden? Probably because gold is a valuable substance, but it's obviously metaphoric because they aren't really made of gold. The color might be indicative of the reddish yellow of what is probably the prototypic wild plant, the Amanita muscaria. And it's an example of the tree with the golden apples is or hung with the fleece is just a metaphor for this plant that the hero has to find, and in finding, in the story of the heroes are engaged in establishing patriarchy over matriarchy. The most famous of the heroes is Heracles, and his name is supposed to mean that he has his calling, the second part of his name, place, because he has managed to defeat Hera. And in doing that, he has put her down and justified the supremacy of her married husband, Zeus. That's a very awkward way to interpret the name, because you have your calling because of Hera means that you're Mr. Hera, that is to say you're matriarchal, and you've taken your name from the female rather than the male. You might think that hero is related to the name Heracles, since he is the prototypic hero. And it may be, but the word hero is cognate with the word for servus. The H sound was originally an S sound. And so in Latin, you have servus. Servus is a servant. So a hero is really the servant of a deity. And as a servant of the deity, what would be the activity of a servant of a deity who was female. Obviously, what the female needs to have served is her sexuality, which would mean to say he is the penis, or he is the phallic element, or the lesser male in the service of his greater female goddess.
What was the fire that Prometheus stole from Olympus?
Okay, now, when he stole the fire, he put it into a narthex, which means that the fire has to do with the same symbolism we were talking about with the Bacchants, with the Thyrsus. The fire has the connotations of heat and transmutation. It's what changes matter into spirit. And so it's not hard to see that it is spirit or soul-like, and and that he stole it in the form of a magical plant. And by giving mankind the fire, he started them on the evolution from primitivism towards civilization. Since, as I said, fire not only changes matter into spirit, but it's essential for how we eat. Rather than eating raw food, we cook it and make it edible. And it was, and when he stole the fire and gave it to mankind, his name means forethought, which means intelligence. What he did was start mankind on the evolution towards the realization of what its potential is in being human. Greek culture is remarkable in the fact that being human is given a higher ethical value than being divine. I was just talking with my class before I came home to talk with you here about the Euripides tragedy about Heracles, where Heracles is the son of Zeus, although he could be the son of a mortal, Amphitryon. Everyone, as I said, you don't know who the father is. Could be someone or someone else, and prototypically someone or someone else means the complete oppositional possibility. So it could be someone celestial or divine. It could be someone mortal. In the case of Heracles, his mother slept with Zeus, and then while her husband was away, but Zeus disguised himself as her husband. And then on that same night, her husband came home and slept with her. And so you can't tell whether Heracles was the son of Zeus or the son of the mortal. But if he's going to be celestial, he has to have Zeus as his father. In Euripides' play, however, Euripides presents an unusual situation where Heracles goes mad and kills his wife and his children, thinking that he's on his way to his celestial identity. And that is true. You cannot be celestial if you have human emotions, if you have a family, the burden of your mortality. So killing your wife and children is the apotheosis of his divine potential. But at the last moment, he doesn't kill his human father. When Athena throws a rock at his father and he falls asleep, and then when he wakes up, he sees his father and he tells his father, "Don't touch me, I'm polluted." But unfortunately, he loves his father, and his father loves him. That is good for his human persona, but not for his divine persona. And what the play is showing, this Greek ethic which is the basis of what we call the humanities. That the potential of our humanism is our great gift. It is something greater than the eternal existence of celestial beings.
What was really happening when Moses had seen the burning bush?
It's probably a version of the same encounter with the entheogen. And as I said, burning is emblematic of transmutation. So you can think of it simply that it's burning, but it's not that. It was matter turning into spirit. And as an entheogen, it would be a substance that induces mystical vision in your ordinary consciousness.
Why refer to Jesus as the drug man?
Well, the introduction to that idea is that, as you all know, people in with an ethnic identity who are assimilating into a foreign environment often change their name to something that the people in the new environment know, because it's very awkward to have a name. People say, how do you say that? How do you spell it? And so forth. So you change it to something else. And so Jesus was a given name amongst the Jews, and Jews who found themselves living in Hellenized environments, to make their name easier for people to use and recognize, they changed their name to Jason. So that is just purely formal association. But we go on to discuss the probability that the Christian myth with Jesus involves a psychoactive sacrament, as probably all ancient original religious experiences do.
What exactly is the problem with Jesus' name being Jesus?
There is no problem with it being Jesus. The problem is whether Jesus really existed, or whether it's purely a myth. I told you about Heracles and the way his mother slept with Zeus, and on the same night slept with her mortal husband Amphitryon. There were versions of that, and it's been played up in modern times in comic books and so forth. That Amphitryon is kind of fool, that he was cuckolded. Someone slept with his wife. What happened to Amphitryon is exactly what happened to Mary, the so-called Virgin Mary. It's hard to see how she could still be a virgin if she's conceived a child. But of course, if her lover was celestial, the hymen would be intact. But she can't give birth without it breaking. But be that as it may, in the medieval period, in the Renaissance, there were works of art and people who jested about the fact that Joseph was cuckolded, that he had the same problem that Amphitryon had. We could go a bit further. I said that Heracles had to be divested of his ties to mortality. So there is a problem with Heracles, first of all. He's usually depicted as rather a muscular, physical male. You might ask yourself whether that physicality is conducive to celestial identity. Think, for example, of what it would be like if you saw Jesus portrayed as a weightlifter. But even if you don't go that far, there are depictions of Jesus that meant to be humorous, where he's hanging on the cross and he's fat. He might have been fat, I mean, if he actually existed, but he can't be fat. And the idea of his being transmuted by the crucifixion to his celestial identity when he's hanging there, obviously quite corpulent, is a joke.
Can you tell us a bit about the connection between the ancient pharmacopoi called Creston as being a corruption of Christ's name?
Yeah, it probably is. Christ means the anointed one, and Christos means the best one. And if one is anointed as the chosen one, is it purely a meaningless ritual, or should you be aware of the fact that one of the ways in which one could alter consciousness would be to anoint oneself with an entheogen? And if this being is a deity, it would be totally understandable that he would be transubstantial or consubstantial, I guess is a better term to use, with the entheogen. So the anointed one is someone who has an identity which is sharing an identity with the substance with which he is anointed, with the drug plant, and in particular the drug plant that induces the mystical vision, which is recognized as the religious experience.
So do you think that Jesus existed? Do you lean towards that he existed, or do you lean towards that he did not exist?
I spent a large part of my life as a Catholic Christian, and I certainly, for a long time, did think that Jesus existed as a historical being. But I am now aware, and I may be wrong, but I've come to conclude that it is a myth like all the others. It's a very beautiful myth, but there is no historical evidence that Jesus existed. Now, of course there isn't, because he's celestial. And so after his mortal existence, everything that was physical disappeared. That's one way of explaining it, but I doubt that he is any more than another version of this quite beautiful mythical pattern, which has to do with our celestial aspirations. But as I've tried to say over and over again, the lesson that Greek humanism offers is that the true expression of our potential is in ourselves as men and women, not as bodiless angels, celestial beings. I think that there is a God. I think that that you and I and all the rest of us are the gods. You can. There's no need for us to have a political structure with someone as our king ruling. It is the highest aspect of one part of our identity, which is, I think, divine. One part of our identity is it's a mystery because we can't stay awake forever. Who are we when we are asleep? I think if you use the latest investigations into atomic theory and so forth, I think that what we are calling God is some universal principle that's at work in the way atoms move. And it doesn't have to be externalized as a being, doesn't have to be anthropomorphized. It's an aspect of our existence that we can't understand. We can't understand it because it's the opposite of who we are. But that is who we are.
Was the orgastic communion found among those polemicized in Jude, 2 Peter 2, Philippians 3, and 1 and 2 Corinthians, and not in the Jamesian and Pauline churches?
Yeah, what the Balkans were doing, as I said, in the 5th century, these paintings make it quite clear that they're having orgasmic sex, but not with physical beings. I think that the aspiration to have that kind of excessive orgiastic experience probably became materialized, and that on occasions these rebels, not perhaps in the 5th century, but later on, probably they were actually physical romps with males present, but they were not originally any males present.
What was the bread, flesh, blood, and wine really about?
Okay, the fact that it's bread and wine should be immediately suspicious, because so closely identified in the classical tradition with the goddess Demeter and the gift of grain, and Dionysus with the gift of the grape. The grain, like the grape, is actually related to inedible wild grasses, and it's only through the grain is a hybrid that was evolved. It began with selecting wild grasses that had larger and larger kernels of grain, and hybridizing those, selectively breeding them to produce the plants that we recognize as the ones responsible for producing the grain, the flour for bread. And bread itself is similar to the fermentation of wine, because leavened bread is leavened because of the activity of yeast. So it's undergone the same kind of activity that produces wine, the ethanol in wine. It's a symbol of civilization. There's no reason why Christian traditions think that having a piece of bread and that it's the body of the deity, or think of how disgusting it is anyway. A sip of wine and that's the blood of the deity would be what puts you in contact with the deity. Now, what am I suggesting? A strong possibility that the Eucharist originally, and probably, as we've tried to show by looking at various works of Renaissance art, that the Eucharist was originally psychoactive, that it was an entheogen. And that's a outrageous statement, but probably true. And the best evidence for that is that the writings of the gospel, they are not by the people that supposedly wrote them. Scholars recognize that there are several voices that are put together in order to tell a story according to this or that disciple, but they're not actually written by that disciple, that apostle. But the writings of Paul are generally thought to be by Paul, and because of Paul's great authority, there was little likelihood that it was editorialized, that it was rewritten. And so we have what he wrote. And in Paul's writings, we have something that if Paul didn't have the great authority that he has, surely would have been excised or rewritten. In the Second Corinthians, he writes a letter to the congregation he founded in Corinth 10 years earlier, and he reprimands them for not doing the Eucharist correctly. And he gives as evidence that they're not doing correctly that a number of people have died. Quite a few have gotten sick, and some have even died. Now, you can think of death as spiritual death, but it'd be very hard to manipulate Paul's words in that context to indicate spiritual death. They're actually dying from not doing the Eucharist correctly. So what were they doing? I believe they were using a psychoactive agent to alter consciousness that was potentially toxic and made them sick. I don't think that he's saying that they shouldn't have a psychoactive sacrament. He's saying that if you don't recognize that it is, if you don't have the correct mythological framework for understanding it as the body, you don't recognize the body and blood of the creator and redeemer in it, you are doing it wrong. But it's toxic. It seems to me that seems to indicate the use of a toxic substance that's potentially not simply mind altering, but in the wrong procedure causing death.
What was really happening with the transfiguration at Gethsemane?
I don't think that the biblical accounts of Christ's life are historical. I think they're mythological. So what was happening is that he was displaying the fact that his physicality was spiritual, that he was a spiritual being.
If there was no historical Jesus, how do you think that the idea of Jesus actually began?
I don't believe that any of the deities existed. As an aside to that, I would say that if the Christian deity was in fact the true deity, by now there should not be other religions. There should not be a god of these people and a god of that people and this and that people willing to kill each other because their god, their leader is the supreme one. If there were a true deity, it should by now have been the universal deity. There shouldn't be just dissent with this group and that group. But there has been a great tendency for people to seek power by acting as the mediator with a supposed deity. So you have priesthoods, and when you have these people mediating with the deity, you often put them in control of society as well. So the original right to be a ruler of a people is because the ruler is sanctioned by the connection with the deity. But we should be able, from what I said about humanism, to realize, and this is something that did evolve in Athens in the 5th century, where it became a democracy, should realize that the only people who should be ruling us is ourselves, not some elite higher hierarchy of people who claim better bloodlines or nobility and so forth. There is no one governing us except ourselves. If we want to live together as a species, as we do, we should be able to figure out how to use the best aspects of our own humanity to be what is in control. I don't think that deities exist except as beautiful configurations of our archetypal patterning consciousness.
What I meant to ask is that how do you think that the idea of Jesus actually started? Like, what was James and Cephas, Peter himself, talking about when they were talking about Jesus?
Well, I don't know how Christianity started.
Do you think that Paul, James, and Peter were all using entheogens to access visions of the spiritual Jesus, or what they thought were visions of the spiritual Jesus?
I think that Paul was, yeah.
And in my last question, do you think that anyone else, based on what Paul says in his letters, were using entheogens to access dreams or visions of Jesus prior to Paul's conversion, or do you think it started with Paul?
No, I think that they were definitely. I think that Christianity began, as I think all religions did, with an entheogenic experience of mysticism.